We operate a large radio station here, started in 1922. We added television in 1950s. And these operated in completely different universes forever. Radio was in the province of audio, TV was in the province of video. And what's fascinating about that is, of course, when TV came on the scene, people thought that radio would go away. Radio has not gone away. We are still operating the exact same radio station that we put on the air 90 years ago in 1922, KOAC AM 550 in Corvallis, Oregon. So as these things get added on, we don't drop the things we had before. There's still audiences, there's still value in what we provide. And then, of course, this thing called the internet came up about 1996, and we weren't exactly sure what that would mean. Well, now what's happened is the internet has entered the frame, and people are now much more used to getting the content where they want it, when they want it, and how they want it. You can now get whatever audio source from wherever you want it on your iPhone or your smartphone or at home. You can get video, and now there's this explosion of people that are creating content. So our competition is no longer the other TV stations or the other radio stations. It's the 15-year-old kid with his iPhone and his Mac creating content and sharing with his friends via YouTube or via a podcast. So this whole realm is changing for us, and we have to change with it. We can no longer be just an organization that broadcasts content, much of which is produced elsewhere, and expect to thrive. Our competitive advantage increasingly is around the stories that we capture and we tell, that we are now an organization of storytellers. We are not an organization of broadcasters. We are not a technology organization. We are a storytelling organization. That's been a pretty radical shift for us because all of us have thought of ourselves as broadcasters. We've had to think about the expense of transmitters and what are the programs that are coming to us from PBS and NPR. We're far less interested these days in what I would call plug-and-play programming. And by that I mean, somebody comes to us and says, would you run our program? We're far more interested in programs where we can be melding local and national together into a unique experience for the people that we reach. And that has been a big driving force of this organization. So instead of just investing in capital equipment, which we've had to do, we now have to invest in our own people. We've spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on training, on multimedia training, because our competitive advantage now is our storytellers. And if we don't invest in them, we don't have a product for the future. You are seeing a massive disinvestment in news gathering in local communities as newspapers are reduced because the ad market is collapsing, the subscription market is collapsing. They can't quite figure out how to get into a digital environment. At least they haven't succeeded thus far. You're seeing commercial television being driven in a direction that is not particularly, some people would say, positive for communities because they're focusing a lot on what are the easy stories about crime and the latest accident and the fire that was over there and whatever else. So there's this, I think, this incredible role in the future for public media, but we have to figure out how we can scale up at a time when the economy is really constrained, and in some cases our business model is being threatened. I mean, if you look at the kind of regulatory framework of public broadcasting, I've always felt as though we're kind of in a straitjacket. And what I mean by that is you've got some people who would think that public broadcasting should get a heck of a lot more public funding than it gets now, but then should be constrained from getting, say, corporate contributions or doing any number of other things or have a bunch of mandates on it. And then you've got the more libertarian view, which is you shouldn't get any money or you should get less money and you should be free to do whatever you need to do to survive because this is a marketplace that ultimately we exist in. And sometimes I feel like what we get is the lesser amount of money and the more mandates and more regulation. And to me, that's the part that's untenable. And so as we look towards new models, we have to be looking for one that is going to be flexible. And if we're going to exist in an environment in which there is less less government money, we're going to have the flexibility to be making it up somewhere else. The worst thing for us would be to have all the mandates, all the regulation, all the constraints, and none of the money. The world of specialization is going away. The world in which I came from out of television years ago was you had very rigid kind of job classes. There were people that were producers, there were people that were videographers, a different group of people that were editors, you had engineers, you had writers. And what's happening now in this multimedia world is all of that is blending. And what you need are people who have skills in multiple areas. Now, I don't think you're ever going to get to the point where you're going to find somebody who is equally good in all of these areas. And the way we think about it is it's not about television and radio anymore. It's about video, audio, and digital media. And digital media means things like still photography, mapping, data analysis, and what we need are people that are comfortable in all of those areas, but more importantly, understand how those tools can tell a story, so that if they're not the strongest in audio, when they go out and do a story, they can think about what is the audio manifestation of this story, and is there somebody else here that can help bring that to fruition? It's really required a breaking down of barriers. Within a typical public broadcasting station that has radio and television, there have been hard and fast lines between the two. My first job was at the University of Wisconsin stations in Madison, and we used to joke about the line of death that ran on the 7th floor between the radio operation and the TV operation. You know, people didn't get along, they didn't like each other. You know, there was a lot of envy about, you know, if you were in radio, it was, oh, those TV people, they're just taking all of our resources, and the TV people are saying, those radio people, they're so last century. And it's really, to me, incredibly exciting to look at how you can blend these platforms and to look at the way it all comes together on the internet or in digital media. I think physical space means a tremendous amount in culture, and particularly as you're trying to bring about change. And my experience is that old buildings, and ours isn't terribly old, but it's 1987, but it was laid out for a time before there were personal computers, when people would send interoffice memos and talk on the phone, and they had all these little offices and cubby holes. And if you have a radio reporter who's working on an environmental story and a TV reporter who's working on an environmental story, and they're 2 floors apart, you're not getting the benefit of them collaborating. It's only by chance that they're going to run into each other. The way we approached it is we built a new content center up on our 3rd floor. And we thought about this long and hard because we didn't want to build a new building. To me, we shouldn't be putting money into buildings. That's not what we're all about. But you need a space in which you can do the kind of work that you're doing. So we blew out walls. We put in an atrium to kind of connect 2 floors together that really weren't connected before. We put in new furniture that would break down walls. We said no high partitions. And you get an interesting kind of cultural shift there, which is people automatically become more collaborative because they have to. And there's also a funny thing that happens with privacy. I think there's a false sense of privacy when people are behind cubicles. And what I've noticed is that when a newsroom or our content center is really, really busy, there's enough activity there and noise going on that if somebody's on the phone, they don't feel like anybody is overhearing their conversation. And in fact, they aren't. They're too busy doing their own things. But the ability for people to run into each other 5, 6, 10 times a day and trading stories and knowing what the editors are looking for has led to some absolutely fabulous outcomes in terms of stories. To kind of bring back a message of change in an organization where things are going really well here. I mean, this is not an organization that is in any kind of trouble. And to come back in and say, look, the world is changing, and we have to change with it. And we have to change while we're strong. And aren't we fortunate to have resources to make the kind of changes we do, and not to do it when we've got a gun to our head, is a really great position to be in. But it's also sometimes hard to instill a sense of urgency, because there's a tendency for people to look around and say, hey, things are pretty good. Why should we change that? We just made a change to our radio schedule and just kind of cleaned some things up, but we did it very deliberately and with a strategy in mind. And for those of us that have done this before, we know that there's an arc to these things, which is when you announce a schedule change, you're going to get 400 people to call you up and say, that's the worst idea in the world. Why are you going to get rid of the second hour of Talk of the Nation and put your local show in there? That's a terrible idea. And then when you actually do it, you're going to get 400 calls of the same ilk, and then eventually people will get used to it. Well, we're an organization that likes to keep people happy. So the frontline people are the ones that are having to deal with this, and we're the ones kind of saying, look, this is what you're in for. And, there's a tendency around the organization to, when you're having to deal with donors that are upset, to think, why are we bringing this trouble on ourselves? Why don't we just want to make people happy? The problem with that is if you don't continually change and adapt and do it before you have to, it's like a tree. You have to prune it down so it will grow. It actually gets easier as things start to work. And what's been interesting is as we've gotten people to collaborate and work together, it starts to pick up its momentum. It starts to become self-perpetuating. But there's also a trap in there that we've noticed. And it's kind of interesting is that what you find is that people sometimes want to get credit for collaborating as compared to for delivering a superior product that an audience really appreciates. So you're in this kind of interesting mode of you want to reinforce that people are doing the right things, but you also don't want to give them too much credit, because if the goal becomes that we're just working together and isn't that great, that isn't necessarily achieving the objective. So we've been, I've had my ear very keenly attuned to, oh, here's a great collaboration story. And I always kind of go, terrific, wow, that's really great, you guys could do that. How was the audience served? What was the public service aspect of that? How did that move the organization forward? And I think people are really getting that now.